Hi. So I sometimes think, how did I get into Airbnb in the first place? And if you went back to 2012, I was buying old guest houses and blocks of holiday apartments and changing the planning permission so I could rent them to students. And I'd been doing that for a few years. So I had a number of student properties and I had various rental apartments. and at that time the student accommodation was good in my town. But about 2012, I went to Cafe Nero on one Sunday, and this guy came in, and he looked a bit like a tramp, to be honest, and he was hungover. He hadn't washed. He looked like he hadn't had a shower for a few days, and he made a beeline for me, and he came over and he said to me, "Can I sit with you?" And maybe me. I said, "Yeah, sure, yeah." So the guy sits there and he starts telling me the story. So, long story short, his wife had left him. He's married to a Polish woman. She'd left him, run off with his friend. He was in his 50s. I think his friend and his wife were in the 30s. Classic story. And he asked me what I did, and I said I was in property. And it turned out that he came from a really wealthy family, and they owned guest houses in Ambleside, and he had a big market in Lancaster. And he just hit the bottle because he was depressed. And he said to me, I told him what I was doing, and he said, "Look," he says, "I'm going to tell you something now." He says, "I'll tell you something that's the future." He says, "When you go away from here, don't forget it, and you need to look into it." And he said, "It's this thing called Airbnb. Have you heard of it?" And I said, "No, I've not heard of Airbnb. I don't know what it is." And he explained what Airbnb was. And at the time, I just thought, well, that's never going to be of any interest to me because I'm deregistering holiday accommodation. Why would I want to do short-term accommodation? It just wasn't on my radar at all. And then about 2015, the student accommodation was falling off in Blackpool, where I had my student houses. The college was becoming less popular, and there really wasn't a market for it anymore. And I had a trip to the Isle of Skye, and a friend of mine lived on Skye, and she ran a little restaurant, but she also had a property that she rented off her auntie, and she had a couple of spare rooms, and she put one of those rooms on Airbnb, and she was bringing in about £8,000 or £9,000 a year, which at that point was probably more than the rent on the actual property, which I was really impressed with this. And I had a property in a village up in Scotland in the holiday area, and I decided I'd try running that on Airbnb, and that was my inroad into Airbnb. So he told me about it. Then it turned out she was doing it 3 years later, and I started around 2015. And at that point, it was just some extra money, really. It was a bit like renting a property, except it did bring more money in, and it meant we could keep the holiday apartment free for us to use as well, and bring some money in off it. And with Airbnb only charging 3%, it was a no-brainer, really. And then about 2015, the student accommodation died off, and then about 2017, I'd say, I decided to convert one of the student houses, or half of it, into Airbnb accommodation and see how it went. And stupid as it might sound, I hadn't considered doing it in Blackpool, because when you live in Blackpool, although you know it's a holiday town, you don't really associate it, because it can be quite a rough place, and you don't tend to think of it as a holiday area, for that reason, that people actually come and stay there and enjoy it. So I started with that property, renovated the bottom half into a 2-bedroom apartment, and it took off straight away. And after that, I resolved to renovate the other properties and bring them all onto Airbnb. And then since then, I've had my own properties on Airbnb. I've done rent to Airbnb. I've managed other people's properties, and really that's what this is about managing other people's properties on Airbnb. So I kind of reversed into it. I made my own way with it, if you'll have it, and learned from the ground up. And at one point I was even doing the cleaning, the laundry. So I was self-taught, I suppose is what I'm saying. So really this is about managing Airbnbs for other people, and about how you can do what I do with very little money down. And nowadays I understand that buying properties is very expensive. You need a heavy deposit. The rules and regs have changed dramatically. So if you took, say, your average rental property, it would depend on area, obviously, but if after all costs you can net, say, £300 or £400, you're generally doing okay. Well, with Airbnb management, you can not have all those costs and manage someone else's property and still make £300, £400, £500, even £600 a month on that property, which makes it a very interesting prospect, a very interesting prospect. So I personally started managing because I was asked to help someone out, and I didn't really want to do it. I didn't really understand how it would work, but I ended up preferring managing to Airbnb my own properties or doing rent to Airbnb. I still do those too, but mostly managing other people's now. That's the route that you could go down if you wanted to get into Airbnb, and with a little bit of work, you could very quickly, 6 months to a year, be looking at leaving your job. I make more than enough money from Airbnb not to do anything else, and from managing Airbnbs. And it led me down the route of starting some marketing, building a website, building a Facebook page, building a Google business page, doing a bit of SEO to it to get it ranking. It ranks quite well now, and it brings in probably a phone call every week, or certainly every 2 weeks. And they're usually high converting. By the time someone's contacted you, they've usually done the homework and maybe looked at a few different companies. And if you can appeal to them, then they're probably going to want to work with you. And once they start with you, if you're bringing the results in, I'd like to think that all my clients are happy clients, you know. So it's quite a positive business to work in as well.